Welcome to the Jets, Malachi Corley. Welcome to the Jets Day 3 draft picks. Goodbye, John Franklin Myers. Let's meet the Jets draft class of 2024 today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's April 29th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, the draft is now complete. We're going to meet the 2024 Jets draft class today. We're also going to break down a trade. There is a player heading out of town. John Franklin Myers was traded to Denver over the weekend. So we left on Friday talking about day 2 of the draft. The Jets just had what, in my opinion, was a grand slam first day. You saw Joe Douglas with discipline. You saw him trading down, adding an extra 4th-round pick, addressing the offensive line with Olu Fashanu. And we moved to day 2 of the draft, and the Jets were without a 2nd-round pick. And it felt like the Jets really wanted that 2nd-round pick because they made a very, very aggressive move. Maybe it wasn't very, very aggressive, but it was aggressive. They traded up, and apparently they were looking to trade up most of the night. If you listen to what the Jets said, there was one player they were really targeting. It was Malachi Corley, a wide receiver out of Western Kentucky, and they eventually got their man. They moved up from 72 to 65. So they traded up from the 72nd pick to the top pick in the 3rd round, 65th overall. They gave up their 5th-round pick in order to acquire Corley and pick him 65th overall. And the Jets said that he was their 4th receiver on the board. He was the guy that was right behind Rome Odunze. And if you were following Thursday night, it really felt like Rome Odunze was the guy the Jets wanted. That what they did was kind of their plan B. And Malachi Corley is a guy, I've mentioned Corley on the show. He's a guy who I think is a really, really intriguing prospect. And he's almost a guy who I think is more like a running back than he is a wide receiver. If you look at his build, he's kind of built like a running back. If you look at what his role was in college, over half of his receptions were screens. And what happens on the screen? Well, it means you're not really running a route. It's more you have the ball in your hands. You have to make plays with it. You're kind of reading the blocks in front of you. In the NFL, it's more like a running back than it is a wide receiver. So I view Corley as a hybrid. And again, I almost more on the running back side than the wide receiver side. Now, of course, our friends in the New York media can never have any sort of perspective. So I'm going to make a plea to everybody. Can we give this kid a chance? Can we not put these ridiculous comparisons on him? Can we not put these unrealistic goals on him as he enters the league? Because if you listen to what people in the New York media were saying Friday and Saturday, you'd think he has to be Deebo Samuel to be successful as a rookie. That's a lot to ask. The expectations that are being put on him, I don't think are fair to him. I want to give him a realistic chance to succeed. Now, if you look at what players drafted in his position typically do, so I took a look at wide receivers who were drafted between 60 and 70 since the year 2000. And the guy who's the middle of the pack player in this list got about 300 yards as a rookie. So let's give this kid a chance. Let's not put these totally unrealistic expectations on him. I've heard Deebo Samuel comparisons thrown out there that he's going to be Deebo Samuel as a rookie. I think that he can play a role in this offense. I think first of all, he's going to take the kind of the gadget touches the Jets run for Xavier Gipson. A couple times a game last year, they'd run Gipson on a jet sweep or they'd throw a screen to Gipson. I think he's going to take them. And if you followed what he did in college, he's a guy who tough to bring down, a guy who breaks tackles, a guy who's very physical. If you watch film on this guy, you're going to fall in love with his physicality. You're going to fall in love with his toughness. There's no question that he brings a very exciting element. But look, he's also a work in progress as a route runner. He again, over half of his catches in college were screens. And when we talk about Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, Aaron Rodgers is a guy who wants very, very precise route running. That's not where Corley is right now. His route running needs some development. And especially when we're talking about a slot receiver, Aaron Rodgers wants his guy to be in a certain spot at a certain time. As awful of an idea as it was to sign Randall Cobb last year, and it was really a horrendous idea. One of the things that kind of made it make sense, and I don't even want to use the phrase "made it make sense" because we're talking about Randall Cobb here. We're talking about a guy who had 5 catches and made $3 million off the Jets. But the rationale for it, beyond him being Aaron Rodgers' friend, is he always knows where to be. He always knows where Aaron Rodgers wants him. And all the great quarterbacks are like this. Brady was like this. Peyton Manning was like this. They want their guys to be exactly where they're expecting them to be. And that means running a very precise route. It means reading the defense correctly, because in the slot you have what are known as option routes, where if the corner you're facing, the slot corner, is playing outside leverage, you break inside. If he's playing inside leverage, you break outside. It's very based on timing. It's very, very precise. Corley's not ready to run those routes at this point. I don't think he's going to be ready to run those routes by the end of his rookie season. Again, I think he's gonna have a role. I think these new kickoff rules. Maybe he becomes the kickoff return guy. Didn't really return much in college, but learning how to return kickoffs is not necessarily the biggest thing in the world. When I think about what Corley's ideal role is, he's different, not stylistically. I'm not saying he's this type of player because he's big instead of fast, but I view him as kind of more like if we're talking about like the boom scenario, I view him less like Deebo Samuel. Now, I understand the Deebo Samuel comparisons from the standpoint he's very physical. He's kind of bigger. He's kind of tough to bring down. But Deebo Samuel is a more conventional receiver also. Deebo Samuel is running conventional receiver routes. I think Corley's role would be something more like, if you remember Percy Harvin. Now, again, not the same type of player, because Harvin was more of a speed guy. Corley's a bigger, stronger guy who's tough to bring down and more physical with his running ability. I think I view Corley in that context. Now, again, as a rookie, look, it'd be great if he comes in and dominates the league. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you have to remember, Garrett Wilson's going to get a lot of targets. Mike Williams is a high-end number 2 receiver. He's going to get a lot of targets. Like it or not, Allen Lazard's going to be part of this offense because Rodgers likes him. He's going to get a lot of targets. Breece Hall's going to see his share of targets. Tyler Conklin's going to see his share of targets. At some point, there just aren't a lot of targets for a rookie. And this is kind of the situation you want a rookie to come in, because, 5 years ago, the Jets would draft a guy like Corley, who's kind of raw as a route runner, and he'd have to step into the lineup right away. And you'd need him to be this outlier. You need to be this guy who's drafted between 60 and 70 and be great right off the bat. They can kind of ease him into the lineup. They can give him some touches to utilize his ability as a runner. They can kind of get him the ball in space and let him do that thing. It's a little extra element you add to the offense as a rookie, and then you hope he grows more as he develops. So, look, I'm not saying it's impossible they can come in and play great right off the bat. I'm just saying I don't think the expectations laid out are doing this kid any favors. I think, you want to be realistic. You want to give the kid a chance, and you want to lay out goals that, you would expect a rookie drafted in his spot to hit. Kind of a guy who's a complement on offense as a rookie, and then you hope he grows into something more. Although, I did have this one idea, is that, I've just mentioned that he's built like a running back. He plays like a running back. His role in college was like a running back. I mean, when they drafted him, I thought, well, maybe you make him, maybe just don't mess around with trying to teach him route running. Maybe just teach him how to read blocks. Maybe just take advantage of his skills with the ball in his hands, and make him a running back. And you can still like split him out wide. You can still put him in the slot if you feel like it. And because you're listing him as a running back, there probably will be defenses that will be dumb enough to put a linebacker on him. And, you know, maybe he could be the complement to Breece Hall. You know, he guy who's a bit of a movable chess piece. Now, can Hackett figure out how to utilize him in that way? I don't know, but you know, a very intriguing pick. And a guy I've mentioned on this show in the past, a guy the Jets were clearly very high on as they ranked him as their number 4 receiver. So that was all for night 2 for the New York Jets. They drafted one player, was Malachi Corley. Jets were very, very active on day 3 of the draft, however, and we're going to discuss what they did as we continue here on this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. And New York, I mean, we're having a really big moment right now with the Knicks and Rangers playing so well in the playoffs, kind of resembling the spring of 30 years ago, the famous spring of 94 in New York. And of course, we got baseball action going on. Yankees and Mets season is in full swing, and FanDuel is the place to be because, again, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I've used Game Time myself multiple times, always for last-minute tickets, tennis, Broadway musical, college football, and Game Time's so easy to use, just a couple taps and you always find a great deal. And with the Knicks playing so well, I mean, those tickets are not easy to get at the Garden come playoff time, and it's even harder to find an affordable ticket. Game Time's your best bet. Again, you get views from your seat, so you know what to expect when you arrive at the Garden. I'm sure you want to cheer on those Knicks as they look to advance to the second round of the NBA playoffs. And Game Time's the place to be. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes as needed as news breaks. Today, we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft. New York Jets completed the draft on Saturday. So Thursday night, night one, they drafted Olu Fashanu, tackle out of Penn State. Night two, in the third round, they traded up for receiver Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. The Jets then concluded their draft on Saturday. There were a bunch of trades. I mean, they actually made 3 trades before they even made a pick on Saturday. They traded down a couple times, and they also made a move, which I think was really savvy. I think this was like, outside of the way the Jets handled Thursday night, my favorite move of the draft was they traded a 4th-round pick this year for a 3rd-round pick next year to Detroit. So essentially, they traded a pick that was in the 120s this year for a pick that's going to fall between 65 and 96 next year. And would you rather have a pick in the 120s, or would you rather have somewhere between 65 and 96? It seems like a pretty easy question to answer. Even if you have to wait a year, it's always better to have the higher pick. So I thought that was a really savvy move. I thought that was like the shades of like the Thursday night round 1 Joe Douglas popping up on day 3 of the draft. Now, the first pick the Jets made was in the 4th round. It was a running back out of Wisconsin, Braelon Allen. And, he's a bigger kind of back. I mean, this is a guy who I think kind of fits the power back role. If the Jets were looking for a guy who's like going to be a kind of a guy who runs between the tackles, he's a guy who very big. He's in the 240-pound range, is kind of a straight line runner. I think his balance is pretty decent. Part of me wonders, maybe sometimes in the NFL, guys get a little lighter and they're able to add, a little bit of juice to their game, add a little bit of burst. I wonder whether that might happen with Allen because, he's a guy who you see the makings of a decent jump cut with him. And, he's a guy who, even though he's a bigger kind of guy, doesn't always like to lower his shoulder, kind of likes to, finesse guys in the open field. And I wonder, maybe that's what'll happen. A guy there are certain backs in the NFL who have done that. So anyway, but he is the Jets' first pick on day 3 of the draft. Next up, the Jets got their developmental quarterback. And, we heard heading into the NFL draft that the Jets were probably going to draft a quarterback on day 3, somebody to sit for a year or two, and, I think it would be unfair to say that this is the quarterback of the future for the New York Jets. I think it's more of a lottery ticket. If you really believe the guy was going to be your franchise quarterback, I don't think you'd wait till the 5th round. But in the 5th round, the Jets traded up for Jordan Travis, pick 171, traded a couple 6th-round picks. All the maneuvering, they ended up with 2 6th-round picks at that point. So they traded up for Jordan Travis out of Florida State, and Travis was the quarterback of the Florida State team that went undefeated in the regular season this year. And then he got injured. He got injured near the end of the season, and that was the number one factor as to why an undefeated Florida State team did not make the college football playoff. The committee did not put them in because Jordan Travis was not there. Travis had a very serious injury at the end of the season. So he's a guy who's probably, he was going to sit anyway because of the injury. We don't know whether he's actually going to step into the, it'll be interesting to see whether he gets on the practice field or whether they just stash him on IR for the season. But either way, he wasn't going to play much this year anyway. May have fallen a little bit in the draft. I mean, he is a work in progress. There's a lot his game needs to that needs to develop. We're going to talk about. I'm sure we're going to talk about him plenty in the days and weeks ahead, because this is purely a developmental pick, and it was a play we were expecting the Jets to make at the quarterback position. Next up, just a couple picks later, so they picked Jordan Travis at 171. 2 picks later at 173, the Jets picked Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. And this was a controversial pick. He's a running back. So this was the second running back the Jets picked on day 3 of the draft. And there were lots of people who were very upset with the Jets drafting 2 running backs. And, I get it. But we're talking day 3 here. And the thing is, when I was watching these 2 guys, I got to be honest with you, I liked Davis better than I liked Braelon Allen. The Jets drafted Braelon Allen 134 in the 4th round. The Jets drafted Isaiah Thomas 173 in the 5th round. It feels like the thing people dislike the most about Davis has nothing to do with Davis. It just feels like people are upset that they drafted a second running back. In fact, he's the second running back they drafted. But watching them, I almost come away feeling like Davis has a better shot of becoming the second running back. Davis also a bigger type back. He's a guy who dominated the FCS level. And, when you're talking about a lower level prospect, I think it's when you're watching that guy, he has to look like a man among boys. And he certainly did. His rate of forcing missed tackles was extremely high. And, for a player like this, I think the athletic testing is important, because one of the things you wonder about with a guy who plays at a lower level, is he dominating because he's really good, or is he just dominating because the competition's at such a low level? Davis says his athletic testing was like average, and he's bigger back. He's bigger than average. If you watch him, like, he understands some of the fundamentals of rushing the football. Like, he understands how to read blocks. He understands the timing, how it meshes with his running. He understands how to set defenders up and make them miss in the open field, kind of throw a move on them and make a cut. Is Davis's ceiling a number 1 running back? That I'm not sure about, but I think this is actually a guy who has a decent shot to be a complement to Breece Hall. And, I can understand the principle of not liking drafting 2 running backs on day 3 of the draft, especially in a class where, you're down a second round pick, where you're already low on draft capital, doubling up at maybe the lowest value position on the field. I get that, but I don't know. I actually liked the second back they drafted more than the first back, and that's not to write Braelon Allen off. And one thing I want to be clear about is, these are all kids who are, probably between 20 and 24 years old. So they all just accomplished their dreams. They're very difficult to project. So I don't want to say anything negative about any of them, but, look at the 2 backs, I like the second guy better than the first guy that the Jets drafted. I mean, that's just kind of how I view it. Then just a couple picks later, so the Jets drafted at 171 and 173. Then they had another pick at 176. Maybe the guy with the most interesting story, Qwan'tez Stiggers. He was drafted from the Canadian Football League. He was drafted from another professional league. And that's because he never played college football. This story's going to get made into a movie one day. Incredible tragedy. His father was killed in a car accident a few years back, and it really impacted him. And he left school, and then at one point his mother signed him up to play like this professional indoor football league, and he caught the attention of this coach who had ties to the CFL. So he ended up going to the CFL and playing for the Toronto Argonauts and playing really well. And interesting pick in part from the standpoint is this might be the one draft pick ever where the pro personnel department probably played a role. In a front office, usually you have a pro personnel department that's like scouting the other teams in the NFL and other pro leagues around there, like the UFL and indoor football leagues and the CFL, because they're looking for guys who are already playing professional football. So this might be the one draft pick ever where the pro personnel department is involved. And you hear that story, it's amazing. I think it's difficult to project what he's going to be in the NFL. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? Difficult to see, but a kid, how do you not root for him with that story? It's like it's a plot of a movie. Somebody's going to make it into a movie one day. And then finally, the final pick for the Jets and the final pick of the entire draft, Mr. Irrelevant, Jaylen Key, a defensive back out of Alabama, a guy who I think projects to be more of a special teamer, a guy who, might be stretched finding a role on the defense, but, a guy who could end up potentially being a special teamer. But that wasn't all the Jets did. in addition to the 7 players they added this weekend, there's a guy leaving town, a guy who played very well for the Jets. As we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about the trade of John Franklin Myers from the New York Jets to the Denver Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We've got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot Pacino machine. But there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent freezes. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Monday, we've broken down the New York Jets 2024 NFL draft class, but it's not just about the players coming to New York. There's also a player who's leaving, and that's John Franklin Myers. The Jets traded the defensive end on Saturday during day 3 of the draft. They got a day 3 pick in return, but it doesn't come till 2026. It's a 6th round pick from Denver, gets JFM off the books. Jets trade one of their starting defensive ends. And, look, I liked JFM a lot. I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of this trade. And part of it's I'm frustrated because indications are this was related to the salary cap. We've talked a lot about the Jets management of the salary cap. And I think this is a situation where the Jets management of the salary cap came back to haunt them because John Franklin Myers is a good player. I think John Franklin Myers was a really important part of the Jets defense. Jets emphasize speed on their back 7 on defense. They want their linebackers to play fast. They want their corners to play fast. They want their safeties to play fast. That means you typically have smaller type guys. And one of the ways the Jets have worked around that, and not just worked around it, one of the ways the Jets defense has thrived is having a bigger type defensive end. John Franklin Myers is in most 4-man fronts would be kind of a defensive tackle because he's in that 290-pound range. But with the Jets, he plays defensive end. And his ability to play defensive end at 290 was really, really important because it gave the Jets a bigger line to protect those smaller guys in the back. He could eat up blocks. He could keep the linebackers and safeties clean on the second level. But he was adept at both playing the run and collapsing the pocket from that position. Many cases, if you get a bigger guy, he can't really get to the quarterback off the edge. John Franklin Myers generated a lot of pressures, and it's a guy who did the dirty work. This is the guy you love because he sets everybody else up to succeed because he's so focused on playing the power role, on keeping everybody clean. He doesn't post huge sack totals, but he still posts pretty big pressure rates. I don't know what the Jets will do going forward. Now, I think the one positive you can say from this is it means the Jets are not going to bury the first round pick a year ago, Will McDonald, on the bench. Will McDonald, we talked a few weeks ago about how it was difficult to see what Will McDonald's role was going to be after the Jets traded for Hassan Reddick because he had 3 defensive tackles in front of him. Well, now he only has 2 in front of him, and Robert Saleh likes to rotate guys in and out. So at least it doesn't seem like the Jets are giving up on Will McDonald. But I think trading JFM, I think people are maybe underselling how significant of a role he played on this defense. And, who slots into that power end spot I was discussing? I think Jermaine Johnson conceivably could play it. He's a guy who could step in. He's a guy who plays with power. He's not as big as JFM, but good at setting the edge. So maybe that's the plan. Maybe he steps into that role. Hassan Reddick, the Jets are expecting him to produce, a big season off the edge as a pass rush, but he's 240 pounds. He's not a guy you get. He's not terrible against the run, but you don't get a Hassan Reddick to play against the run, especially a guy at 240. I don't, and it really just felt like a salary dump. It really felt like the Jets were just trying to get JFM salary off the books. The move adds even more dead money to the Jets salary cap balance sheet. John Franklin Myers puts another around $9 million of dead money on the Jets balance sheet, and it only saves them $7.3 million. So I'm surprised the Jets didn't want to figure out another way to do this. I mean, I'm kind of puzzled by the move because they've made a lot of these cap maneuverings over the last year. I'm kind of confused as to why this is the point where they draw the line in the sand. And look, I'm not saying JFM was a guy who was untradeable. I'm not saying he was a guy that could not be traded under any circumstance. In fact, we've discussed on the show over the course of the offseason many scenarios where it would make sense perhaps to trade JFM, but they involve getting a guy, getting a replacement in here. And I don't know who plays this role now. I think the Jets defense may struggle a bit against the run. Again, maybe Jermaine's the guy who steps into that role, but he's not as big. I don't know. I have to say, this of everything that happened this weekend, this is probably my least favorite thing, because all the prospects the Jets drafted, again, younger guys. Even if you're not a big fan of a prospect, the draft is very unpredictable. Sometimes the guys you dislike the most end up being the best players from your draft class. But I mean, and they didn't get anything in return. I don't even care that it's a 2026 pick. We've discussed it frequently on the show that it doesn't matter if the pick's a year or two from now. Picks have to me, a 6th-round pick's a 6th-round pick. It doesn't matter whether it comes now or whether it comes later. But to only get a 6th-round pick for a guy who's a quality starter at the defensive end position, a critical spot, a guy who played a critical role in your defense. I mean, look, I have to question that. In fairness, JFM did have a bit of a down season last year. He's approaching the magical 30 mark. Is it a situation where the Jets are trading a guy a year too soon rather than a year too late? Well, maybe, but they didn't really get much in return. So, when you trade a guy a year too soon rather than a year too late, usually you get something good in return. I think if we're talking about things that deserve criticism for the New York Jets this weekend, this is the spot I'd go. Because again, JFM, a really quality player, a guy who I think maybe plays an underappreciated role in this defense, a guy who really makes the defense work through doing a lot of the dirty work. He heads out of town for Denver, and I mean, I told you the numbers. I mean, it's not even like they're saving that much in cap space. I mean, it saved $7.3 million. Jets needed to do something because the Jets were like right up against the salary cap. But I mean, I don't know that this was the right move for the Jets to make. Especially if they didn't get anything in return. Like if they got like a day 2 pick, like okay, fine, I would get that. But to get nothing for a guy who's a pretty important starter, I mean, I don't see how you don't question that. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.